What if I told you that one of the largest empires of the ancient world, a civilization that dominated an entire subcontinent, was just completely lost? Not just defeated, but erased from memory for almost 2,000 years. Well, this isn't some fantasy story. It's the real history of a forgotten Indian empire and the incredible story of its rediscovery. So, think about it. How would you even begin to solve a historical cold case like that? An entire empire, a massive political force, just vanishes from the history books. Where do you even start looking? Well, as it turns out, the clues were hiding in plain sight the whole time. And just look at the timeline here. This really puts the scale of the mystery into perspective. Around 250 BCE, this empire is at its absolute peak. And then, nothing. Radio silence. For over 2,000 years, its story was just gone, until this incredible breakthrough in the 1830s started to put the pieces back together. Now, our story of discovery doesn't actually begin in the distant past. Nope. It starts in the 19th century, with a British official in India who got totally obsessed with these strange cryptic messages he found carved into stone all over the country. Let me introduce you to James Prinsep. Now, he wasn't some Indiana Jones-style adventurer. He was an officer working at the Mint for the East India Company in the 1830s, but he kept noticing these ancient pillars and huge boulders that were covered in a script that literally nobody could read. It was a completely lost language. So as Prinsep starts to chip away at this code, a mysterious figure begins to take shape. The carvings don't give a name, but they keep talking about a great king with this title, Piyadasi. Who was this powerful, but apparently kind, ruler that history had completely forgotten? You know, the titles themselves were the first real clues. Piyadasi, beloved of the gods. This wasn't some tyrant boasting about his conquests. This was a king who wanted to be seen as someone benevolent, someone with divine favor. It just made the mystery even deeper. And then, boom, the breakthrough. Prinsep managed to cross-reference these inscriptions with old Buddhist texts from Sri Lanka that also mentioned a great king named Ashoka. He connected the dots. The mysterious Piyadasi was none other than Emperor Ashoka, the ruler of the massive and long-lost Mauryan Empire. An entire chapter of Indian history was suddenly back. But that just led to an even bigger question. How did this empire get so huge in the first place? To get that answer, we've got to rewind the clock even further. We need to go back to a time of massive technological and social upheaval, a period that basically set the stage for India's first great empire. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a complete societal revolution. Society shifts from these semi-nomadic tribes, where your wealth was literally just how many cows you had, to settled farming communities where land was everything. And the real game changer, the piece of tech that made it all possible? Iron. Before iron, the thick, dense jungles of the Ganges River Valley were pretty much impossible to clear. But with strong iron axes, people could finally cut down the forests. This opened up some of the most fertile land on the planet, which led to a huge surplus of food. And whenever you have way more food than people need to eat, you get cities, you get armies, and you get kings. Now, this farming boom didn't exactly lead to a peaceful paradise. Instead, it sparked a massive competition. By the 6th century BCE, the whole region was like a checkerboard of 16 powerful city-states, all fighting for control. It was basically a 100-year battle royale, and when the dust settled, one kingdom, Magadha, started to come out on top. So, why Magadha? What was their secret sauce? Well, they had the perfect recipe for an empire. They had the best farmland, which meant tons of tax money. They had easy access to iron ore for making the best weapons. They had forests full of elephants, which were basically the ancient world's battle tanks. Add in a prime location on the river for trade and a line of incredibly ambitious kings, and you've got a force that's pretty much unstoppable. Building an empire is one thing, but actually holding it all together, that's a whole different challenge. So how did the Mauryans, especially Emperor Ashoka, manage to run a territory that was so incredibly huge and diverse? This was no loose confederation of states. The Mauryan Empire was a well-oiled, centrally controlled machine. From the capital, Pataliputra, royal princes were sent out to govern major provinces. Everything was connected by roads and messengers, and it was all backed up by a huge, powerful army. Their instruction manual was a text called the Arthashastra, which is a famously ruthless guide to politics, spying, and how to hold on to power at any cost. But then, something happened, a major turning point. In 261 BCE, Ashoka, doing what emperors did, launched this brutal war to conquer the last independent kingdom in his way, Kalinga. He won, but the victory came at a terrible price. The sheer scale of the death and destruction completely broke him. And the amazing thing is, we know exactly how he felt because he told us. He carved his feelings of regret right into stone for everyone to see for centuries to come. He publicly wrote about how painful the slaughter was to him. I mean, think about that. A conquering emperor admitting regret? That was completely unheard of. So what did he do? He completely changed the philosophy of his government. He introduced this new policy called Dhamma. Now, Dhamma wasn't a religion. It was more like a moral code, a new mission statement for the entire empire. He basically decided he was done conquering with swords and was going to try and rule through ethics and morality instead. Of course, no empire lasts forever. After the Mauryan Empire eventually fell apart, new dynasties popped up. But they couldn't just copy the Mauryan playbook. The world had changed, and they needed totally new strategies to grab power and convince people they were the legitimate rulers. Yeah, after the Mauryans, the whole model of how you run an empire shifted. The Mauryans were all about direct control from the capital. But later rulers, like the Guptas, did things differently. It was more decentralized. They ruled through a network of local kings, or samantas, basically buying their loyalty with grants of land, and trying to awe everyone by claiming they were actual gods. And you can see this really clearly with some of the new dynasties. The Kushanas, for example, they came from Central Asia, so they really had to prove they belonged. So they borrowed an idea from China and started calling themselves Son of Heaven. And the Guptas just piled on these huge, over-the-top titles like King of Great Kings to make themselves sound all-powerful, even if their direct control was actually a lot weaker than the Mauryans. Which brings us right back to where we started, back to James Prinsep and those mysterious carvings. So how did he actually do it? How did he crack the code? And more importantly, what can these ancient messages really tell us? And what can't they? Honestly, it was just brilliant detective work. For one script, Brahmi, he noticed that some of the letters looked a little bit like letters in more modern Indian scripts. So he basically worked backward, matching sounds until it clicked. For the other script, Korosti, he found his own Rosetta Stone on old coins from Indo-Greek kings. The coins had the king's name written in both Greek, which he could read, and Korosti. So he just compared the names letter by letter and cracked the alphabet. So clever. But here's the thing you always have to remember. Even with the code cracked, the story isn't complete. These inscriptions are just one side of it. They're often damaged, letters are missing, and we almost always only hear the official story, the king's perspective, not the farmer's. And think about this. Ashoka's inscriptions, talking about how bad he felt about the Kalinga War, they're found all over India, except in Kalinga itself. That silence tells its own story, one that historians are still trying to figure out. The rediscovery of the Mauryan Empire is just an incredible reminder that massive, important parts of our own history can be lost and then found again. It all comes down to someone patiently cracking a code. It just makes you wonder, right? What other amazing stories are out there, carved on a rock or stamped on a coin, just waiting for someone to finally read them?